Okay, so everyone, it's week 3. That means assessments due next week. That's going to be on a Sunday. The good thing is if you finish the lighting, right? That's basically almost 60% of what you probably need to do. That means you only need to think about, I guess, shading and then just making everything look better. And then you're practically done. Okay. So the shading aspect of it will be, I guess, relatively straightforward. And I'm going to explain that, I guess, today. So let me just check if I'm already recording. Okay, so I'm recording and I am recording. Okay, so a quick reminder with regards to the assessment, right? So again, you have a file and I already specified what you guys need to do with that file, right? So again, there's a backstory there, there's an emotion, and I guess a mood that we're trying to accomplish. So make sure you think about that when you start developing or developing your scene, right? So what that means is obviously if we specified it to be a gloomy nighttime scene, and then what you have is a daytime scene, then that's obviously an issue, right? That means, obviously you can't do that in a production. So in a production, you have to follow what the production design and what the look development, design specified for that particular shot. So pretty obvious, okay, in regards to why we're doing the things we're doing, okay. With that said, notice that with the backstory, it does tell you, right, that it's a sad, misty, moonlit night, and then it's a dusty cabin. So again, damaged roof, all of that stuff. So the scene itself has to convey that backstory. So make sure you think about that when you're developing your lighting and also developing your shading. Okay, so again, we talked about lighting. I already gave you guys your lighting direction that includes a light plan and also a color key, right? Or color, sorry, a color script. So we're going to skip lighting for now, and we're now going to have a look at shading. Okay, so something that we haven't covered though is what shading or what's the call out sheet? What's the direction for the shading for your project? Okay, now rather than having you just decide on your own what shading you want, I'm going to specify it in this class. Okay, so this is going to be the shading, and I'll share this, I guess, in Teams later on. But again, what you're supposed to do, right? This is what we call a call out sheet. Although it's very rough, I don't really have anything like samples for that. But this is just the stuff that I want you guys to concentrate on. The rest, if it's not specified here, you can, I guess, decide on your own. But I do need, right, this candle here. Okay. Sorry, guys. Looks like I'm not sharing my screen. Jeez. There you go. Okay. Great. Okay, that would have been a disaster. Okay, anyway, so let me just share the screen and I think we're good. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, so again, this is the shading direction, right, that you guys will be doing. Okay. So again, for everything else, you can decide. Okay, you can, I guess, decide on your own. But I do require that for this one. Okay, you follow this um, shading direction. So in games, you sometimes call it a call-out sheet, in film as well. But again, see, I do want a dirty frosted glass in this area here. Okay, so particularly in the middle, you can have it on the everything, but particularly in the middle, I want that to be dirty frosted glass. Okay, we want an old mossy stone wall. Okay, this one has to be, I guess, a new candle with some dust in it because, again, it's a dusty scene. We want old cobblestones. I didn't specify the type of cobblestones. I didn't even specify the color of it. That means you have freedom with regards to that. But I do need that to look like cobblestones. Okay, so this one, old wood with some burns. So the idea is maybe in the past there was a fire and then that caused some of the burns. But we want old wood with some burns here. Okay, we want dirty stained glass as well here. Okay, in the lamp. We want an old ceramic look for this, I guess, ceramic doll. And then we want this wine-stained old glass here. Okay? So, again, everything else, you have freedom in terms of what you can do with regards to shading, especially when you have a wide shot. But again, for this one, I just want you guys to make sure that you follow this, I guess, shading direction and also this call out sheet. Okay. So again, the reason why you're doing that is when you're doing it in production, uh, you need to follow production design, right? So let's see how well you're able to follow direction and how well you're able to follow a call out sheet. Again, as I mentioned, I didn't specify things like color. So basically, what you're able to do is capture the idea, right, of the call out sheet and the shading plan. And then you can even develop your own color scheme, right, in terms of what you're supposed to. Maybe your choice of colors, and maybe are you going complementary? Are you going with different types of color schemes? Okay. Now, is this clear for everyone? As I mentioned, I will share this in our Microsoft Teams page, but is this clear in terms of what you guys will be doing? Any questions before we continue? Relatively clear in terms of what the direction is. Okay. Okay, so what this means is obviously when we specified now some of this, guys, I really want you to just treat it I guess um, well, treat it with, I guess what I'm saying is, even if I didn't specify what materials you need to do, it's going to be ridiculous, right? If, for example, this one, this cup here will be, I don't know, will be liquidy, okay? Or it's going to be impractical for this, somewhat wooden table to look like a piece of metal, because it does look like a wooden table, right? So I'm going to give you, so there's freedom, but at the same time, just treat it in a rational, I guess, manner, right? So for example, if you have something like, I don't know, this clock, for example, okay? So it might be impractical to make it a clock made of pure glass. So again, these are things that I just want you guys to, consider, even if I haven't specified what it is. Okay, so it looks like it's clear for everyone. So that's good. Okay, so if you want, I'll also share this. This just gives you an additional backstory to the cabin. So there's fire damage there, and at the same time, it's long abandoned by a family. That's why it's still homely, but it is long abandoned, right? That's why you see cobwebs there, because again, insects, dust, and spiders have claimed the area. And then again, it used to be a charming cabin. Okay, so again, think about that when you're deciding on things like shading and also lighting. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Now, just to again have a look at our look dev plan. Remember, right? Our look dev plan involves, getting your 3D file, but working with what color script and what mood board we actually specified. And then next, your master lighting. Okay, so we lit it. And then we're going to do procedural shading. So for today, we're going to concentrate on the aspect of shading. Okay, and then we're going to render it out. Now, let's have a look at your master lighting first. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at your challenge, and let's see what you guys were able to complete. Again, uh, you really want to engage in the challenges because, as I mentioned, it does contribute to your marks, even if it's late, totally fine. But the idea is, let's see where you're at. Let's see what your direction is. And at the same time, we're able to spot potential issues, right? So just an example here. Okay, notice that potential issue there is obviously we need we might expect some sort of bloom or some sort of effect of the glass there on that object, right? So again, I understand that you guys are still working on it. Okay, so for example, this one, remember in the lighting plan, we do expect some of the light beams to go inside um, the window and inside the door. So this means integrating something like, something like volumetric lighting there. At the same time, remember, right, there's broken roof on the top. And if you have a look at the lighting plan, we do expect light coming from the moon, seeping through the broken roof and creating some patterns there. Okay, similar to what you have here. Okay, so as I mentioned, again, starting point, but again, we can already spot potential issues, right? So again, you can start, working on those things. So for Jungyun, for example, let's have a look. So I like that. Notice that again, we might need to include elements here on the, you know, on the, sorry, on the door. Remember, there's also light seeping in. You're following the color scheme and the light plan, which is good. But at the same time, right, you can work on things like cameras, glows, for example. That is a glowing effect. So see, I can still see um, your approach of that can change. And then also think about, again, there's light seeping or coming from the broken roof on top. That means you have to consider that when you're creating lights here, meaning we should expect some sort of pattern here. Okay. And then on top of that, let's have a look at Jared's, for example. So it looks good. So see, I could see some light patterns. It looks like it's a little bit of, I guess, light patterns of trees. So it looks good, but again, at the same time, we might be able to enhance that by just choosing different types of gobos, right? So maybe that might enhance the look we're going for. So I also like this one. Okay. Um, and see, notice that again, uh, almost everything that we specified is almost there. And then you can play around with things like your cameras and things like your lens, because you might want to consider adding things like a bloom and adding things like a vignette to create, an even, I guess, a more, I guess, stylized, not really stylized, but uh, even more depth into your image. Okay. So again, make sure to share as soon as you can, everyone, so we can see some issues. We'll talk about how we can adjust the shading as well for the cobwebs there. Okay, there you go. Okay, so good job. As I mentioned, you still want to, again, for the students who haven't engaged yet, make sure to do it, because as I mentioned, contributes in your mark, and at the same time, you're just chipping away on your assessment, right? So for example, here, okay, I can easily say that Jungyan and me and Danny as well, and at the same time Jared, are probably around 50-60% there already in terms of the assessment, even 70, because the shading aspect of it, because we're using proceduralism, it's going to be relatively straightforward. So see, it's almost there. So again, it's good to see that you guys are already working on the assessment. You already have something at this early stage. Okay, so with that said, let's have a look at shading now. Okay, so this week we're going to concentrate on shading, primarily procedural shading and texturing, right? And then we're going to have a look at some techniques that involve procedural shading, and I'll talk about procedural shading in a sec. Okay, so just some shading basics, right? Because when you're dealing with shading, you really have to use the hypershade. So in the past, you might not have used the hypershade, but if you're doing things inside, let's say, Unreal or inside Houdini or any other application, to be able to create more advanced shading, you have to be able to control the network or the shading networks of your objects. And in Maya, the way to do that is to go under Windows, and there's rendering editors, and there's something there called Hypershade. Okay, and this is your Hypershade window. Okay, and in your Hypershade window, basically, you probably covered this already in the past, but you just have your library of materials on the top hand side, and then you have the materials you can create or shaders you can create on the bottom. And then this is actually your network, meaning this is the interconnection between different types of textures and different types of materials or shaders. And then you can play around with how those connections work here. And then you have your viewer there, and you have your property window. But really the most important thing at this stage is this one. Sorry, this and this. Okay? Sorry, guys. There you go. Okay? So, let's have a look at how you can apply that. I'm going to open my scene. So just to illustrate that, okay? And let me just save this as, and I'll save this as shading. Okay, there you go. Okay. So just to illustrate my point, okay, maybe this one, okay? Again, if you go Windows, Rendering Editors, and then go to Hypershade, that's your Hypershade window, okay? Um, Again, as I mentioned, see, these are all my shaders or materials, right? Used in the scene. These are additional ones I can create. And this is the network, right? Then let me just graph and clear the graph. So this is the network, right? This allows me to modify and manipulate the connections of my shaders or my materials. And then this is just a preview. Doesn't really matter. I can just change it to Arnold. So I can just see what it looks like in an Arnold rendering. And then these are the properties of whatever material you're selecting. So an example of this, guys, okay? If you select, let's say, this object, okay? What material is this object using? The way to plot out that material is to just select that object. And I already selected it, right? And then just go to Graph. And just go to Graph Materials on Selected Object, okay? And then this gives you basically the graph. Although we don't really have a network or a graph, it's just a simple material assigned to that object. So see guys, notice that we have that matte toy. Okay, so that matte toy is assigned to that object there. And basically that matte toy looks like, you know, a piece of, looks like clear ceramic, similar to what you see here. Okay, so it's relatively straightforward, right? The reason why you might want to do that is because it's sometimes hard. Let's say if you have like 30 or 40 materials here, it's very hard to pinpoint which material you're actually using for a specific object. So rather than looking for the specific material, just select the object and then just graph the material on that object, and notice that you are able to just see that material and work on that material. Okay, so relatively straightforward stuff. Okay, so with that said, okay, Hypershade. This is all good. But as I mentioned, right, the work of the material or the importance of the material is it allows you to, it gives you the properties of your object or the surface properties of your object. It really defines the materiality of that object, right? Is it matte? Is it made of wood? Is it made of rubber, etc.? Okay, so it defines the materiality, the surface properties of that object. Okay, so currently, okay, my object is this one. It has a matte toy. Or you know what? Let's just select this one. Okay, so that object, if you have a look at my rendering, and let me just render this one out so you can see. So let me just render this one out. And maybe I'll just modify the renderer so it doesn't eat up too much resources. So guys, I'm managing too many stuff here. Too many windows flying. So let me just adjust that. There you go. Okay. And let me just change my render settings so this is more manageable, right? Let me just Windows, rendering editors, render settings, adjust it a little bit. That's good. My resolution is actually okay. You know what? This is actually okay. Anyway, see guys, notice now that I have that. Okay. And the reason why you have that is because the material of that object or the shader of that object, I'm using materials and shaders interactively. So basically when I say shaders, I'll also, you know, I also mean materials. So I'll graph materials on selected object. It's called matte glass. And again, notice why we're getting this. We're getting this because the material properties that we specified in the matte glass is actually for glass. So what do I mean that it's actually for glass? Let me just turn this off because it's annoyingly eating too much of my resources because I'm also recording. So let me just change this to hardware. Okay, there you go. Anyway, going back. Okay, let me just, you know what? Let me just close this material viewer And let's just focus in on the area there. Okay, so the reason why you're getting glass is because we talked about this last week, right? The reason why you're getting glass is you don't have any base color, meaning it doesn't have any diffuse component to it. And the reason is when you have something like glass, it doesn't really have any diffuse. It's not like it's made of wood where you have a distinct diffuse color or diffuse component to it. It's really primarily transmissive, meaning it lets light go in and it allows light to bounce off the surfaces, right? So as I mentioned, that's why we're getting glass because our transmission is actually set to 1. Notice what happens if I change that to 0. If I change that to 0, guys, notice now that, see, now we're starting to see the base color, okay? So let me just, I guess, re-render this so you could see it, okay? So now we're getting that red color primarily because we now remove the transmission component of it and now rely primarily on the base color. That's why we're getting red, although you're not seeing it here because, let's see, because it looks like it's still updating or it might have crashed, but let's see. So quick sec, guys. Let's just, again, because I'm using hardware renderer and maybe because I'm also at the same time recording our session using multiple platforms, it might eat up some of my memory there, but let's see. Looks like I might need to turn that off. Okay, going back, right? Let's just open Maya again and let's just open that scene again. So I think I covered most of it anyway last week, so we don't have to worry about that too much. Maybe what I'll do is let's have a look at something else, meaning another object then. So I prefer going open and then let's have a look at shading. Okay, so with that said, as I mentioned, I just have too many stuff open here. So what I'll do is maybe this one, just to show you guys. That's candle, right? So that's a candle. I'll go rendering and go hypershade. And let's see if I have a material assigned to that candle. So I have a matte regular assigned to it. You know what? I'll assign the material to the candle. So how you assign the material to that candle is you, I guess, create the material first. So what I'll do is I'll go Arnold. And I'm going to create a material. And maybe let's clear the graph first. So clear graph. And then I'm going to create a material. And I'm going to use an AI standard surface, which is basically a straightforward material. It's a good starting material for any object you're creating, right? So I'll just use that as my AI standard surface. That's my material. I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it matte wax, for example. And that's going to be the material I'm assigning on our candle. So this one. And what I'll do is I'll select that candle, and to assign the wax material, I'll just go here and look for that matte wax. I can right click on it and then assign that material to selection. Okay, or you can even just middle mouse button drag that wax material and drag that to the object itself. Okay, so that works. So let's see what it looks like. Okay, so if I go to my render view and I render this one out, let's see. Okay, you know what? This is fine. Okay, so see guys, notice that I assigned that matte material there, but it doesn't look anything like wax. Okay, and the reason for that is because when you create that material, it has that base component, it has the specular component, but again, there's no transmission, there's no, I guess, translucency in it. So if you want to add translucency, maybe you can just adjust the transmission properties of that. So let's see. If I adjust the transmission properties of that, guys, notice what happens. I start adding that transmissive property there. Okay, maybe I'll increase that. And maybe I'll make that, let's say wax is made of, I don't know, maybe it's yellowish. So I'll have that as yellowish. Okay. And then the depth. This is where I can control the depth of where that light penetrates their surface. So, or penetrates the object. So maybe I'll increase the depth a little bit. And then maybe I'll just adjust the scatter as well. Okay, meaning it's basically the color of the scattering. So when it goes inside the surface, it scatters the light. What is the color of that scattering? So for example, if I have that at green, notice that, see? No, you know what? Maybe I'll just have that as yellow as well. So maybe something that looks like wax, and then maybe adjust the depth a little bit. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so notice now it's starting to look like wax. Okay, I can adjust that a bit further, but you can also use presets, guys. So again, notice that there's no base component there. We can even adjust subsurface. But again, if you just want a starting point, maybe I'll actually just you look for wax here and then replace that. Okay, and notice what happens. See, it actually gives you some base color, but at the same time, it also gives you some transmission. Okay, so it's not, so if you have something like wax, it's not fully transmissive, but it also has that aspect of base color. So what I'll do is I'm going to perhaps see, so there's still base color. It's not zero. If it's zero, notice that it's, so that's one. So see, there's an aspect of the base color there, or there's still a base color component. So maybe I can adjust this, make it look like yellow. Okay, and then maybe I'll adjust the transmission as well, make it look yellow. And notice now that again, maybe the scattering, I'll have that as yellowish as well. Okay, so notice now that I have something, I guess, that looks like, there you go. Okay, so notice, guys, that I do have something there that looks a bit more like wax. And the reason why it looks like wax is because now we integrated a component of transmission, right? Where the light can go inside the object. And then we didn't have it go all the way. So it's not fully transmissive. So a combination of transmission, specularity, and base color allows us to create that wax effect. Okay, so notice now that I have something like that here. Okay, so hopefully that's relatively clear, okay, in terms of, again, the shading basics of this. Now, regardless of what application you're using, you always get the same thing if it's physical base rendering, because they'll always have that aspect of base color or diffuse color, and then you have specularity or metalness, and then you have transmission, and then subsurface, and all of that stuff. Okay, so again, I leave it up to you guys to explore some of that stuff yourself. And we're going to explore, other stuff later on as well. But see, it's really just a combination of those different elements there. Okay. So with that said, okay, what else can you do? Okay. Let's have a look at. Okay, that's fine. I guess, you know what? Maybe here. Okay. So maybe this one. Okay. So for example, right, I have an object there. Okay. Maybe I just want that to be, I guess, a little bit emissive. Okay, so I'll select that object. You know what? Maybe these objects here. I'll go to my perspective view. So basically, I just want this object, and that object to be transmissive. Or sorry, emissive, meaning it actually almost like it emits light, but not really a light emitter, right? So what I'll do is I'll just go again under Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. I'm going to create a material first. So I'll go Arnold and then create a material. And then I'll just clear the graph first. So this is the material I created. Okay, I'll middle mouse drag it. So I'll give it a name. I'll call that matte emissive. So meaning it actually emits color, emits light. Or not really emits light, but emits some sort of emission, right? So what I'll do is I'll assign that to my objects. So basically this one, I just want them to just glow a little bit. And I'll add that to my emission. So assign material to selection, and let's see what that looks like rendered out. Okay. So I'm going to render it out, see if that works. So if I hit play, so see, it's rendering. So what I'll do, guys, is I'm going to adjust, okay? I'll actually go to emissions this time. I want to introduce an emissive property to that object. So what I'll do is maybe just change the color to something like yellow, or maybe, you know what, maybe red or orange. Okay, and then I'll just increase the weight, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, and then hopefully it doesn't crash. I forgot to save it, but let me just update the scene. There you go. See, guys, notice now that I have those objects emissive. So notice now that it's actually emitting light. Okay, so you have those two are not, it's not technically a light emitter, it just has that emissive element that makes it look like it's emitting light. Okay, so see, notice now that I have something like that. Okay, now again, this is fully emissive. What if you just want it partially emissive? That means you can just lower the emission to something smaller like that. Or maybe you want it emissive, but at the same time also a little bit transmissive, meaning it's like made of some sort of emissive, emissive glass. So what I'll do is I'll increase that and maybe change the color to something um, darker. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. So you won't able to see it really unless we zoom in, but we now have that dual property where it's a little bit emissive, but also has some transmission in it. So it actually looks like emissive or glowing glass. Okay. So hopefully this is clear. And this is what your shading work will look like, right? First stop, you're going to start creating shaders. You can think about materials later on. Just come up with the shaders that make sense for you. Okay, so once you have that, then you can play around with textures. Okay, so again, looking at our workflow. Okay, so we have the shading basics. You understand that shading basics, so you understand things like emission. We'll talk about subdivision and wax. So I think subdivisions, I already mentioned this last week. Okay, so for example, this is quite sharp, right? So notice that it has sharp, it has that. Again, the reason is if you have a look at the object itself, okay? So if you have a look at the object itself, see, notice that it's low res. Now you can smooth it out if you want, but I'll show you again a method we covered last week where instead of making that smooth, okay, by smoothing it, I can actually just add the subdivision in real time or meaning in render time. So what I'll do is I'll select this. I'll look for my Arnold tab in my attribute editor, and then I'll just look for subdivision, and then I'll just add a subdivision in render time. I'll use Catmull-Clark, and basically it just subdivides it 1 or 2 times depending on your iteration here. So maybe I'll divide it 2 times or 3 times. And notice what happens, guys. Okay, if you have a look at the rendering itself, see, notice what happens. See, notice that this is smoother now. If you don't believe me, change it back. So this is an iteration of 2. Notice that if it's set to none, notice what happens. It's quite sharp. See, you can actually see the black unsmooth areas there. But if I change that and have Catmull-Clark and maybe iterations of 2, notice that that actually softens it. Okay, I'll do it also for the other one, which is this. So again, add a Catmull-Clark subdivision, 2, and notice now that actually makes that smoother too. In fact, I'll do it for this one, okay, the entire thing, where I just subdivide that in real time or render time, and then see, notice now that with subdivisions of 2, that just smooths it out during render time. And now we have something that looks even smoother when it's rendered out. Okay, so again, notice now that I get a better looking, object there with smooth edges. Okay, so again, a quick and easy way to just add subdivisions and make things smoother during render time. Okay, it just saves your resources rather than smoothing it manually and adding polygons there. I'm just doing it in render time. Okay, so quite useful. See, this might be useful for something like this one, which it's a bit jagged. Let's see if we can just add some subdivisions during render time. So Catmull-Clark, add 2, and let's see what that looks like. So see guys, notice now that's smoother compared to what we had earlier, right? So I think earlier we had it at none. So a bit more jagged. So see, notice that you can really see the jaggedness of that. So what I'll do is I'll just add that Catmull-Clark and maybe even subdivide it by 3. And then now we get a smoother result here. Okay. So, okay, so hopefully that's clear. Again, we might need to, some of these objects, we probably need to smoothen it really manually. But see, that's actually okay in terms of what I'm trying to achieve. Okay, so I'm happy with pretty much everything there. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Maybe one last thing. Okay, we had to look at subdivisions. We had to look at subsurface scattering, or basically it's just adding transmission. And then you have emissions there, right, with the lamp and the candle. And then let's just have a look at one last thing, and that is how you can manipulate the shader of your cobwebs. And what I'll do is I'll just zoom in or focus in on the cobwebs themselves. So maybe that bit, right? There you go. Oops. There. Okay. See guys, I'm just focusing on the cobwebs themselves. So how can you adjust the material, the shading of that? Okay, so to add or manipulate the shading of that, remember, we can go here under the shape node, we can go under our node, and then we can just make sure it's rendering the curve, right? And then we can increase the size of that curve, right? So maybe we can make it bigger or smaller depending on what you want, okay? So what's the material I'm using here? I assigned the material already, but what we can do, guys, is we can actually create our own material. Remember, in Hypershade, maybe I'll just create a new material. Again, AI standard surface, and I'll just call that material, and let me just clear the graph. And then I'll just use, I think it's this one. And I'll give it a name, matte cobweb. Okay. Let's see if I can just assign it directly. Okay, remember we can select the cobweb. Can I just drag this? Let's see. Can I drag it? Yes, I can. So see, I can middle mouse button drag it directly there. Okay, so now it's using the cobweb. Okay, so if it's using the cobweb, I middle mouse dragged it. Then what I can do is I can manipulate the materials of that cobweb. So let me adjust that. There you go. So I'll just adjust the material properties of that cobweb. So see guys, so maybe I'll make it, I don't know, I'll go presets. You know what, maybe just for testing, I'll make it look like frosted glass. So maybe I'll change that to frosted glass, and notice now that it actually, I guess, looks like frosted glass now. Okay, so now I have that, as I mentioned, looking more like frosted glass. Okay, and maybe I can change the color a little bit. So maybe it's going to be a little bit bluish. Okay, there you go. And notice now that it looks like a little bit like, um, so I do have an issue there because it's transmissive, guys. It's now giving you bouncing of lights here. So maybe I'll just change the preset. Let's just bring it back to, I can even just combine it with ceramic and then blend it like 75%. Okay, so there you go, right? So notice now it's a blend between those two materials. Okay, and now I guess I have something like that. Okay, so I think I leave it at that with regards to talking about shading, just checking if it's clear with regards to some shading basics. So you know how to add transmission like glass, subsurface, you know, subdivisions, you know how to adjust the materials on, let's say, you know, the cobwebs, and then other stuff as well. Okay, so everything clear, just checking with everyone else if that's clear. So that's Jungyan, Jared, Jacob. Relatively straightforward in terms of how we do things, right? Okay, so with that said, okay, let's have a look at some other things. Okay, let's have a look at texturing now. Okay, so as I mentioned, our technique for texturing will be procedural. Okay, because there's two ways you can texture this. There's actually a lot of ways, but anyway, two ways you can texture this. You can use the regular texturing methodology, which you did with your, I think, ACR class, and also in your AAC, which is Advanced Asset Creation. So in your basic asset creation and advanced asset creation, you might have dealt with more regular texturing, meaning you export something in Substance Painter and then you bring it back. Okay. Now what we're doing is we're doing more procedural. So again, the idea behind regular shading is you create UVs on your object, and your UV object, you're exporting that to something like Photoshop or Substance Painter. You create the texture there and bring it back. Okay, so that's manual way of doing things. Primarily because if you have like 100 objects there, you'll end up doing it one object at a time. You can do multiple objects at a time, but it's still the regular texturing approach. Okay, so now what we're doing though is we're doing another different a common approach we usually do in games, where instead of just relying on, so instead of manipulating the textures to fit the UVs, right? So that's what you're doing with Substance Painter. You're manipulating the textures and the textures based off the UVs of the object. You can do it reversely, right? Meaning, instead of doing that, instead of manipulating the textures to fit the UVs, you can actually modify the UVs to fit the textures. Okay, so this is more of a procedural method of texturing. Okay, so you do this by perhaps using what we call tiling or tiled textures. So what do I mean by tiled textures? Tiled textures mean that if you tile this or duplicate this texture multiple times, so we basically have one tile. So let me just show you what I mean by tiling. So just to, I guess, so again, for this to work, you need a texture to be tileable. Okay. So what do I mean by tileable textures? Okay. That means is if you duplicate the texture or texture tiled, okay. Let's see. So what this means, guys, is if you duplicate that texture, right? Let's say that's one texture. So if you repeat and duplicate that texture, creating a tiled effect, what happens is it's still seamless. Okay? Meaning even if you copy and duplicate that texture, you'll still end up with something relatively seamless. So this one, for example, right? See, this is the main texture here, but notice how relatively seamless that looks. I understand that eventually you'll see a pattern, okay? But if you just limit the number of duplicates or the number of tiles that you have, then maybe those patterns won't be as obvious, okay? And we use this a lot, okay? So just to show you guys, so see, again, the idea behind it, right, is if you tile something, see, there you go, okay? If you duplicate something, if you duplicate a tiled texture, okay, oftentimes you won't see any seams at all. So see, this one is not tileable. Notice that the seams aren't really, it's really visible, but this one is tileable. Notice that you're not seeing any seams in the middle. So, okay, so for example, if I just type in non-tileable textures, and again, you've probably done this already in other subjects, but I just want to emphasize that point, right? I want to emphasize the point because, see, that's not tileable. So see, notice that you duplicate the texture, but notice that you actually see a very visible tile here, okay? This one is tileable. See, notice that you don't see any tiles, okay? Even if you end up duplicating the texture. So see, you duplicate this texture, guys, see, this is tileable. See, even if you duplicate that, notice that it's still seamless. Not all textures are like that, okay? So again, as I mentioned, we want textures to be tileable for this, okay? For this to work, okay? So the good thing about that is tileable textures are so easy, relatively easy to find. You can download it yourself, you can make it yourself. Let's use this first approach, which is downloading it, okay? So what I'll do, guys, is I'm going to look for useful links. Some of you are familiar with this, but if you are familiar with Megascans, basically with Megascans or even with Substance Source, you have a lot of tileable textures there. But Megascans is easy. Okay, let me just log in and sign in through Megascans. Hopefully, still remember my password. Good. Okay. So just checking. Have you guys worked with tileable textures before? With Megascans before. Anyone here who hasn't worked or has worked with Megascans already? I'm assuming that this is level 300. Most of you have worked with Megascans. Okay, so which is good. So let's have a look. Okay. Okay, so just an example. Okay, let's look for, let's say, a texture. I'm going to go to, let's say, surfaces. Okay, again, the beauty behind this, guys, is again, in Megascans, all these textures, are usually tileable. So for example, if I look for something like, let's have a look at what we're supposed to use. So that is, okay, there. We're supposed to use mossy stone wall. Okay, so let's have a look. So I'm looking for stone, and I'm looking for mossy stone, or maybe let's just type it in. Mossy stone. Okay, so mossy stone wall. Maybe this one, guys. Okay, maybe I like that. So I'm downloading this. I know that it's stylable. So what I'll do is I'll just look for download maybe a 4K. You know what? Let's just do 2K. 4K is fine, but just to save resources, I'll just do 2K. I'm going to download that, right? So download that, and then again, it's free. Um, but just take note, right? If you're downloading anything, just make sure that you follow the rules for downloading stuff. Meaning, if you're supposed to provide referencing or or uh, I guess give credit to the artist who did it, then make sure you do that. Okay. So let me just again. So this is Stonewall, guys. Okay. So again, the great thing about this is the scans include not only the textures for the diffuse, but it also has displacement, normal, roughness, AO. I'm actually going to show you how to use all of them, right? Maybe all of them except, you know what? Let's just do all of them. Okay. Anyway, I'll just go to downloads. Okay, that's my stone wall, and then maybe I'll just rename this, and then I'll call that mossy. Okay, again, I'm going to copy that, cut that, and then plug that into my project. So I think it's here. Geez. So I think it's this one. I'll put that under my source images. I already have some textures there. So I'll just go create a new folder. And I'll just call it tileable textures. Okay, and then I'll just place in, let's say, that one. So that's my stone mossy wall. Okay, remember, we have stuff there. Okay, so what do I prefer doing? I actually prefer creating the material first, guys. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create the material first. Let's go under Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. Okay, again, in Hypershade, we create the material. Okay, so let me just clear the graph. And then let's just create the material. So that's going to be AI standard surface. Okay, now before that, I'll even just quickly check if my color management is turned on. So it's usually turned on, but you always want your color management to be turned on for this. And we'll talk about color management maybe next week or maybe the next assessment. Anyway, this is my material, and I'll just basically put in matte. This is going to be my mossy stone. Okay, there you go. Okay, so this is my material. There's a lot of ways you can do this, guys. I just prefer doing it here. Okay, so what I can do, everyone, is maybe you can even do it here, really, but I'll just do it here. Okay, so I'll just close this material viewer. Okay, and let's have a look. Okay, so first up, we need to grab whatever texture it is. Okay, albedo. So what's albedo? Basically, albedo is just your diffuse base color. Okay, your base color or diffuse color. Albedo usually means that it's not affected. So a lot of our textures are actually pre-lit already. Meaning, if you take a photo of, let's say, a wall and you want to use that as a texture, what happens is you're also taking a photo of the lighting in that wall. So for example, if it's daytime or nighttime, notice that again, the lighting actually contributes to that wall, right? What the albedo does, it takes away all of that lighting, okay? And it just gives you a really flat texture. But for us, doesn't matter for now. We know that we're going to plug that into the base color. So how does this work? I'll just go here and then just look and click on that. I'll show you multiple ways to do this, but the easy way of doing this is just click on this button, just go File, and just look for that texture, okay? Okay, so let's see. Okay. Not sure with regards to, usually some of them might be free, but some of them basically it just creates a marketplace. So where some of them will be free and some of them will be, I guess, but I'm assuming that most of the textures you see in Megascan will still be free. But again, there will be stuff that's not free. It's like Sketchfabs. Sketchfab, some of them are free to download, some of them won't be free. So it's going to be a combination of both. But anyway, with regards to this, right? So let me just explain why color management is important. Because when you're dealing with things like base color or albedo, you really want the color space to be sRGB because most of them will be sRGB. Okay, and we'll talk about that later on in the future a bit more. But anyway, I'm going to look for my tileable texture, stone wall, and I'm looking for albedo, right? So there you go. Okay, great. So we already have that albedo texture there. That's good. Let's just have a look at our material again. Okay, so I'll just click on this material. We assign that albedo texture there. But we're not done. Because remember, right, in the texture itself, it actually has something called a roughness map. So what's roughness? Roughness usually means there's diffuse roughness, but roughness usually means specular roughness. So we need to plug our roughness map here in the roughness. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just go roughness, click on this button. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'm going to look for file again. Okay, again, there's fast ways of doing this, but I'll just do it manually for now. But then what I'll do is I'll look for tileable textures, and then I'll look for roughness. Okay, there you go. Okay, so the tricky bit is this is roughness, guys. Roughness is technically not an image. Okay, when you're dealing with roughness, you're actually dealing with data, meaning it's actually, again, it's not treated as color. It's actually treated as data, meaning if it's white, quote unquote, it's basically fully, I guess, fully specular. If it's, if it's white, I think it's purely rough, but if it's black, it's purely smooth or specular. Okay, so what that means is for the color space, you actually want to change that under utility. You actually want to change that to raw, meaning you're treating it as data. Okay, again, it's not treated as an image when you're using roughness maps. It's usually dealt as data. So you want to go here, change utility to raw. Again, notice what happens if you actually have your material open. You can now see the interconnections between the file textures and the material itself. See, notice that the albedo map or the diffuse map is plugged into the color. Notice that the roughness map is plugged into the specular roughness, not the specular color, specular roughness. Okay, and again, specular roughness is treated as data. So what you want to do is change that to raw. Okay, some applications automatically change it. In Maya, it actually sometimes automatically changes it. But for now, guys, see, I just have that at raw. Next, remember, RGB, if it's a texture plugged into the base color, most of the time, I'm not saying all of the times, but most of the time it will be treated as RGB. Okay, it won't be treated as raw. Basically, what I'm saying is sometimes when we take photos or we take textures, maybe it's not sRGB. Maybe we actually made it linear already, meaning we go here under linear and we actually change that. Basically, it's linear color space, but you won't deal with that too much. For this one, it's usually sRGB. Okay, so we'll deal with that for now. Anyway, going back, we still have two more textures that we need to think about. Okay, normal map. Normal map allows you to add surface detail or relief on that object, meaning some will be extruded, some will be dented. But again, it just changes the normals to create that illusion of complexity, right? So what we'll do is I'll just go under geometry this time. Okay, and under geometry, notice that there's something there called bump mapping. Okay, I'll go to bump maps. Okay, and under bump maps, I'm going to look for 2D textures, file, and I'll just look for my texture. So notice what happens, guys. It gives you this bump map. It's not a bump map. It's actually a tangent space normal map. Okay, so how do you know it's tangent space? Normally, if it's this color, that's a tangent space normal map. If it's a bump map, it's usually grayscale, similar to this. Okay, but if it's a normal map, it's usually tangent space normals. Okay, so make sure you set that to tangent space normals. The texture itself, you actually plug that into the bump value. So I'll just look for the bump value, and we'll do this again later on. Okay, and then I'll look for the texture. And the texture is going to be under tileable texture, normal map. Okay, now take note, normal map is also data, guys. Okay, now some of you might think it doesn't matter, it's trivial to change it to raw or sRGB. No, it's not. You'll actually get the wrong result if you have the wrong color space here. So again, use the correct color space. It's supposed to be raw, it's supposed to be treated as data, right? So normal maps are not images. It's not treated as RGB. It's actually treated as data. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just have that as data, raw, and that's it. Okay, one last thing, I think. You know what? That's fine for now. Okay, let's talk about the ambient occlusion and the displacement map later. But for now, let's see what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to assign this matte mossy onto our object, particularly maybe this object here. Okay, so I'm going to look for my wall. So see, this is my wall group. In my wall group, there is, I think, door. Okay, there you go. Maybe I'll assign it to my door wall and this stone group. Okay, so I'll assign it there. Okay, so what I'll do, guys, is I select both of them and then I'll assign that matte. I forgot, it's matte mossy. This one, mossy stone. Assign material to selection. Let me just save this one and let's see what that looks like rendered out. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll render, run the RPR. Okay, and let's see what that looks like. So again, take note, right? So see, guys, notice what happens there. See, that's actually looking okay. Okay, notice what happens. We have the object, or we have the textures, or sorry, we have the material assigned to the texture. Okay, what I'll do is maybe I'll just, so you can really see it, guys. Let me just temporarily, right? So you can really see it. Let me just temporarily adjust the ambient light that I have here. Maybe increase it to 3. And maybe just there you go. Okay, there you go. That's actually not helping. Let me just undo that because now it's confusing. Okay, there you go. And let me just, you know what? Let me just zoom in to that area so you can see. Okay. So, where is how do you control this texture? So this looks okay. The problem is I really want to control this texture, right? I want to control how it's placed and I want to control how it's oriented, okay? As I mentioned, the difference between procedural methods and the regular texturing method that you've done is that you adjust the texture to fit the UVs, but with proceduralism, you can adjust the UVs to match, I guess, the texture. So how do you do this? Okay, so what you can do, guys, is you can actually go under your UV editor. You can select the object, let's say this objects. Okay, you can go modeling, you can go UVs, UV editor, and notice that these are the UVs for those objects. Okay, let's have a look at this stone group first. Okay, so see, guys, this is how it's being, I guess. Let's see if I can just display the objects. There you go. Okay, so I'll just select all of those objects so you can see. So see, guys, this is our texture here. Okay, so this is our texture. Okay, notice that if it's tileable, right? What happens is if it's a tileable texture, and let me just undo my selection so you can see. Okay, so what happens is if it's a tileable texture, see, you can actually duplicate this texture and have it cross multiple tiles. So what does this mean? This means that you can actually manipulate, right? Okay, so this one, I can manipulate all the UVs, modify them. I can make them smaller. Okay? Or I can make them bigger. I'm not concerned it goes over that 0, 1 texture space. It doesn't matter because if it goes over that 0, 1 texture space, it will just tile that texture. Okay, so hopefully I can just show you the tileability of it. Forgot how to here. View, um, textures, UV sets. Should be fine. Okay. I just want to see it tiled, but I just forgot how to adjust the tileability of it so you could see everything. But I'll just figure it out later on. But anyway, it doesn't matter. All I'm saying is, if it goes beyond that 0 and texture space, right? What Maya will do is it will just tile that texture. So you actually get the same texture here on the top, same texture here, same texture here. So what happens is, notice that if you modify it, okay? So see, if I make it bigger, notice what happens. See, the textures actually adjust. So see guys, there, if I make that smaller, notice that the textures also adjust. So see, notice that the textures are now bigger. Okay, all, or I can make it even rotate. So see, notice that I can rotate it. Hopefully it's not, there we go. Okay, uh, you know what will probably make this easy? If I just started off with a simple object first, but it's fine. So hopefully you can just see that I am able to modify it, right? So see, notice now that I have something like that. Okay. And again, see, if I can rotate it, notice that, again, I'm modifying the UVs and controlling the placement of the textures based off how I actually rotate the UVs. This works because the texture is tileable. If the texture is not tileable, then you'll actually see seams there. Okay, notice how that actually works really well. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll just zoom in to other parts of this. Maybe here. There you go. Okay. And maybe, you know what? I'll really just increase. Let's see if I can just increase the lights I'm getting. So let me just see if I can just adjust the lights, guys. There you go. So see that light, increase the exposure, and then maybe, I guess, this light, I'll also increase the exposure. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. There you go. Okay, so now I just made it a bit clearer. And then I'll just temporarily turn off my environment light. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so just to prove my point, see guys, those are my textures, and maybe I'll just zoom out a bit more. Maybe I'll just zoom in here. There you go. Okay. So see, this is what I mean, guys. Okay. So as I mentioned, right? If I want to modify how the textures are placed, this is my wall. Okay. Notice that again, with that wall, I can select the UVs now. Because the textures are tileable, I can make it bigger. Okay. Notice how that actually changes. See, I can make it smaller. There you go. And maybe I'll just update the full scene. Okay, there you go. So, or maybe I'll just select the UVs again. So see, notice that I can rotate it. So see, notice that I'm rotating the textures. Okay, like so. Now, and then maybe I can even make that bigger. Okay, so notice that if I make it bigger, see, notice now you can start seeing the individual tiles. Or not the, but you're seeing finer detail there. Okay, so again, I'm able to control the textures instead of manipulating the texture to fit the UVs, I'm actually manipulating the UVs to fit the texture, and I can control the placement of the texture using that particular method. Okay, is that clear for everyone at this stage? Just checking if this method is clear. So what you're doing is you're assigning a tileable texture, right? And from that tileable texture, you're adjusting the UVs to fit that tileable texture. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so just to show you guys, I'll do it one more time. Okay, because and then maybe I'll show you how to add things like displacements and also things like ambient occlusion later on. But I'll just do it one more time. Okay, maybe this time I'll look at something like, it's just hard sometimes. Let me just, maybe here, I'll zoom out. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, maybe let's have a look at that wooden um, cabinet. Okay, so I'm going to look for a wooden texture. So let's look for wood. So I'm going to make it really clear. So maybe I'll just have wood there. And then let's look for something that you can really see the pattern, I guess. Let's look for... there you go. So maybe this one, guys. Maybe I want even something clearer. Sorry, guys. Let me just look for something clearer in terms of, this one, for example. That's too shiny. Takes me a long time to select textures. Anyway, I'll just randomly select one just to illustrate my point. So maybe this one. Okay. So again, 2K texture, wooden facade, and then download that. And then again, I'll just assign the textures. So wooden plank, I'll extract that. And then that's my textures, everyone. And then let me just change that wood plank. Okay. So again, I'll copy that, plug that into my project folder, because again, that's the preferred scenario, right? You make sure you actually plug that into your project folder. So I'll just plug that into source images under my tileable textures. Okay, with that said, let's have a look at how you can assign it. Okay, so again, I prefer doing it in my hypershade. So Windows, rendering editors, hypershade. Okay, and under hypershade, I'll just clear graph, and again, create my Arnold material. So I'll just go Arnold and AI standard surface. Okay, so it's AI standard surface 27. I'll just give it a name, matte wood cabinet, for example. Okay, so let's have a look at adding our albedo. So albedo, that's under color, right? So again, file, look for that color. So that's under tileable textures. So I'll do this fast because we've done it already. So albedo, there you go. Remember, sRGB, that's all good. Okay, so I'll go back here. Specular, that's roughness. So I'll just click on roughness here. Not roughness color, it's roughness. I'll go file, and I'll just go look for that roughness. There you go, wooden plank, and then there's roughness there. Okay, and again, that's not sRGB, that's supposed to be raw. Okay, one more time. This time I'll go to geometry, bump mapping, click on that. Okay, similar stuff, I'll go file. And under file, change that to tangent space normals. Click on this, that's where the bump value, the texture needs to be plugged, tileable textures, and then wooden plank, and then that's normal. Okay, again, not sRGB, it's supposed to be, as I mentioned, raw. Okay, because it's data. Okay, with that said, let's assign that material back to our wooden plank. So what I'll do is I'll select this wooden plank, wooden cabinet. So our wooden cabinet is this one, guys. Okay, so that's entire group. Then I'll look for that material. So that's matte wood cabinet, assign material to selection. Okay, so let's have a look at what it renders out. So I'll go render view. Okay, and then let's see. So render, update full scene. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So it's still rendering. See, there you go, guys. Okay, maybe I'll zoom in so you could see a bit clearer. My lights are colored, so that's why it might affect what you see. But see, guys, that's my assigned texture, right? So that's my assigned texture. Notice that that's not really looking really good. Okay, that's because, as I mentioned, this object actually already has UVs. If you don't have UVs on that object, you have to make it. And you can just use automatic, which is relatively straightforward. Meaning you just go here, UVs, and just do automatic mapping, right? So that's relatively straightforward. Anyway, since I don't like how the textures are placed, I'll just go add it one object at a time. Or maybe multiple objects at a time. Maybe for example, this one. Okay, I'll select this object. Okay, I'll go to the UV editor. Okay, see, guys, that's the UVs for that object. It's primarily, I guess, this one. Notice what happens, right? I can easily select the UVs or UV shells of that entire object, and then maybe I can scale it down. So see, I can scale it down. See, I don't like it, but I actually prefer rotating it. So I'll rotate it. See, notice what happens. It's rotating, and then there you go. Okay, so notice what happens there. It's rotating, right? Now it has the correct rotation. Maybe I'll scale it down, 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 and let's see what that looks like. So see, notice now that it actually looks better now. Okay, I can scale it down, down, down. Let's see. Notice now that looks better. Okay, or maybe I want that bigger, depending on you, right? So let's have a look at another thing. Okay, not a big fan of what's happening here. This one. You can actually select that object directly from the image, right? So see, the reason for that is, see, this is the UVs of that object. Let's have a look. I'll select the UV shell, select all of it. I'll adjust. See, I can make it bigger. I can reposition that, or I can scale it up. So see, so notice that it's scaling, but I can also rotate that. Okay, so see, notice now that it's rotating, and now that actually looks slightly better, although I prefer to make that big. Or you know what, make that small. There you go. Okay, so now that looks better for me. Okay, so I just rotated, controlled how the texture is being assigned, and I'm getting, maybe you know what, I'll add some rotation there, and maybe that actually does look good. So maybe I'll just have it like that, and maybe just keep it really small. There you go. So see, so maybe that's what I want. Okay. Okay, almost done. So maybe what I'll do is even adjust this a bit further. So maybe I'll select that. Okay. And maybe after selecting that, maybe I see those are the UVs. Again, if you don't like the UVs in terms of what you're getting from the UVs there, you can always just create your own UVs by just going UV and then just use automatic mapping. So see, now it's created an automatic map. Okay, so I created an automatic map. Now I'll just create modify the UVs again, or UV shells, or maybe I'll delete the history and then update my render. And then I'll just modify, like I mentioned, modify the UVs after. I just need to pause this. Okay, so UVs, select that. See, guys, I'm just demonstrating, right? See, I think it's this area here. I can scale it up. So see, and then maybe I can even rotate that. There you go. So see, notice now that I'm rotating that. Obviously, it looks bad. I just need to look for something that actually makes sense. So maybe something like that. So see, notice now that I get something like that. Okay. So again, the idea is you're manipulating the UVs to match the texture rather than the other way around. It gives you a more procedural way of, of shading, right? Or modifying your textures. Again, the idea behind it is you have to have, I guess you have to have tileable textures for this to work. Okay, so just checking if that's clear in terms of, I guess, we'll just need to cover maybe a few more, two more topics, and then we're done with the shading aspect of it. But is the workflow clear? Just checking with Ida, Danny, Jared, Junghyun, and Samuel if the workflow is clear in terms of what you probably want to do with regards to texturing. Make sense? Okay? In terms of how we approach it, right? We don't texture one object at a time. We can actually texture multiple objects, especially if we just want the same material for all of them. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so with that said, we just have two questions or two things that we haven't done. We don't know yet how to manipulate or how to use that ambient occlusion map, which is really common in a lot of the textures that you see, right? The downloadable textures that you see. If you, for example, export stuff in Substance Painter, ambient occlusion is there. The problem is there's really no ambient occlusion. There's no ambient occlusion box or setting or so as I mentioned here, right? This material. There's really no ambient occlusion property that we can assign it to. So let me just demonstrate that. Okay, so Windows, rendering editors, Hypershade. So remember, so see, we'll just clear the graph. So as I mentioned, right, let's look at the wooden texture. So see, wood texture, I can select that material, plug that in here, and I can just graph input-output connections. So see, so I can just graph that material. Okay, so again, the material itself or the shader itself, notice that it doesn't have ambient occlusion. It has base, specular, transmission, subsurface, all of that stuff. No ambient occlusion, guys. Okay. Now, in some applications, they do have, I think in Unreal, it has it. Unity as well. In Maya or in Arnold, it doesn't. But basically, ambient occlusion is just something you combine with the base color or the albedo to create the final, I guess, diffuse map. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Okay, let me just show you. Okay, so notice that if you have a look, see, that's my albedo. Okay, my albedo is connected to, there you go. So my albedo is actually connected to the base color. Okay, so the technique to combine ambient occlusion with the albedo is to just simply multiply those two images together. Okay, why multiply? Because the dark parts of the image makes the other image darker. The lighter parts of the ambient occlusion makes some of the parts of the image lighter. Okay, not lighter, but it just maintains its lightness. So what do I mean by that? Okay, this is your ambient occlusion. It's plugging into the base color, right? That's why we have the texture. So what I'll do is I'm going to plug in or import our texture. Okay, so I can add either a file texture. I can go here and I can just go and look for a file one. So that's under textures. And maybe I can use an AI image, or I can just go to Maya and I can just look for, I guess, 2D texture, and I can just plug in a file. Okay, so see guys, that's a file image. Okay, that file image, I'll just look for the ambient occlusion. So this one, it's the ambient occlusion in my wood plank. It's this one, AO. So see, that's the ambient occlusion. I'll open that. Okay, so basically the ambient occlusion is now plugged into that object. Ambient occlusion is usually sRGB. Okay, meaning it's not necessarily data. It's just a black and white or grayscale image that you can multiply with the diffuse image. But anyway, ambient occlusion, usually sRGB. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to, I mentioned, multiply that with my albedo. So what I'll do is look for multiply. I'll use AI multiply, which is an Arnold version of the multiply node. So AI multiply, plug that in. So see, it basically requires two inputs, right? It doesn't really matter where you place the first one, but see, I'll plug in the first input here by dragging this button. Okay, out color here, see, this is the output, drag it there in the second. And then the resulting image is going to be now connected to the base color. Okay, so what happens is, from a logical perspective, right, you just have the albedo and the ambient occlusion multiplying each other using this AI multiply map, and then just plugging the result directly to the color. Okay, so oftentimes it doesn't really matter that much. I can show you the result, but you can probably not tell at all. So if I just render it out, so see, this is what I had earlier. Okay, let me just share this. Maybe save this. Okay, and I'll just render it again. Oftentimes, a lot of you can't even tell the difference. But let me just show you, I guess, the difference. It just makes some of the crevices clearer. Okay, so just to show you guys, this is, and let me just save this again. You know what? I'll just save it now. Okay, so see, this is before. So see, this is without the ambient occlusion. This is with the ambient occlusion. So see, notice that it just highlights the dark spots. So again, with, without, with, without. Sorry, without. See, notice that the dark spots aren't very clear, but this is with the ambient occlusion. The dark spots are clearer. Okay, so you can actually see the areas where there's significant crevices there, there. That means I need to modify the UVs there. But see, now again, before, after, before, after. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, right, the ambient occlusion just really highlights the areas that are going to be shadowed a little bit. Okay, so just take note of that. So is it clear how ambient occlusion works inside? That's right. So question from Ida, is the multiply function the same as Photoshop? It's the same as it's the same in all applications. Basically, if you're multiplying images together, right? So for example, if you multiply something with 0, that's black. You multiply something with 0, you get 0. Meaning it makes things darker because anything you multiply with 0 just makes it 0. If you multiply something with 1, you basically get the same image, right? So that means bright areas will remain bright if they're multiplied by 1. Bright areas will become darker if they're multiplied by 0. So that's what the ambient occlusion does and the multiply function does. Okay. So again, all functions are actually math operations. So screen, add, they're literally adding pixels together, adding values of the pixel, and then scaling it correctly. It's different if you're not dealing with sRGB images, but it's a bit more advanced. But we can talk about that, in the future. But anyway, hopefully it's clear, right? Ambient occlusion. The only thing that is probably the trickiest here is if you want to integrate something like displacements. So displacement is really, and you know what? I'll skip displacements just to make it easier on you guys. Displacement basically actually deforms the object itself, right? So the map itself or the displacement map actually deforms the object. It physically deforms the object. And I'll just skip that because if you end up using that, you have to subdivide the object. So maybe we'll cover that next assessment rather than in this assessment. Okay, so I'll just leave it at that because we just need to cover one more topic before we wrap up. Okay, so one last topic before we wrap up, guys, is oftentimes, right? So oftentimes, the scenario is one object might be made up of multiple materials. So just imagine rust, okay? Or just imagine, just imagine burnt wood, for example. Maybe some parts of the object has burnt wood, but other parts aren't burned. So there's actually two materials there, interacting. There's the burnt material and there's unburned material. Or maybe let's say something like rust. So there's two elements working together there. Maybe there's the unrusted object, so parts of the object is unrusted, but certain parts are rusted really bad. Although you can actually do it using using masking in Substance Painter. But again, just imagine, for example, let's say you have glass. Okay, glass is transmissive, but because of age, there's moss growing on the grass. So what happens is you now have two materials interacting there. You have the mossy material, but also the glass material. So some parts are glass, but some parts are moss. Now that's a bit trickier. If you try to mask it in Substance Painter, oftentimes you won't get the correct results. Okay, so basically the issue is oftentimes when you're dealing with complex objects, it's not just one material assigned to it. It might be multiple materials interacting. Okay, so if you have that situation where you have multiple materials interacting, okay, this is where you can use something called a layered shader. So similar to Photoshop, basically it allows you to layer shaders together. So let me just show you what I mean. Okay, I'm going to go graph, and then I'm going to go clear graph. Okay, so what's a layered material? Okay, I'll go under Arnold. Notice that, yes, we're familiar with the AI standard surface, but there's actually something there called AI layered shader. Okay, that means we can actually layer shaders together. So I just click on that. Okay, notice what happens. That AI layered shader has multiple layers, possibly assigned to it, right? So what does this mean? You can assign one material on the first layer, assign another material to the second layer. In fact, you can have as many layers as you want. Maybe 8. But you don't really need more than 8. You don't even need more than 3, really. So again, layer 1, layer 2. So how does this work, guys? What you need to do is you just need to assign the material or shader you want to assign for layer 1 and also enable layer 2. Okay, so just to prove my point, we created 2 materials, wood, and we created, you know what? There's wood and, because the wood I have here looks like the stone as well. So maybe what I'll do is, maybe the 2 materials I want to play around with is glass. Okay, so maybe the glass and maybe the wood. Okay, so maybe for whatever combination, for whatever reason, there's a combination of glass and wood there. Okay, so maybe for the first input, I'll have that as glass. Okay, so I'll just middle mouse glass, middle mouse button the glass material in input 1. Okay, and then the second material is going to be wood. Middle mouse button drag the wood material to the input 2. Okay, of layer 2. Sorry, input of layer 2. Okay, so let's see what we're going to assign this material with. So since we already have this object, okay, I'll just assign that object or that material to this object here, which is the ceramic doll. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just assign that material. Remember that material is AI layered shader. Let's just rename that. So maybe matte layered. Okay, so I know it's weird because I'm trying to assign both glass and wood, but it's the concept that's important, right? So this layered material has both a glass component and a wood component. Okay, and I'm assigning that to our ceramic doll. Okay, so it's weird because it's supposed to be ceramic, but anyway, it's again the idea that's important, right? So I'm looking for that matte layered. So where is it? Matte layered. This one. Assign it. Okay, and then I'll just look at the render. Okay, so render, and then let's have a look at that rendering. Okay, so I'll render this one out. Update full scene. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, there you go. And maybe what I'll do is, let me just move this so you can see it. There you go. Okay, so see guys, notice that for some whatever reason, it's currently made of wood, right? So it's made of wood, okay? And the reason for that is when you have a layered material, it usually uses the last layer that you created, that wood, just to prove my point. So see, currently it's made of wood, but if you turn off or disable the wood, notice what happens? It's now made of glass, right? So see, notice that I disabled the wood, it's made of glass. If I enable the wood, it's made of wood, right? So relatively straightforward stuff. So what controls which parts are using which? It's actually this mix one, okay? So just to show you, if the mix is set to 0, notice what happens? It's using the glass. If its mix is set to 1, it's using the wood. So what this means, right, is if we assign a texture on that mix parameter there, what happens is certain parts of the object will be made of wood, certain parts will be made of glass. Okay, so just to show you, I'm going to perhaps select that object. I just want to see what the UVs of that look like. So UVs, if it's too small, you might not see it properly. So you know what? That's actually fine. It's using that 0 on texture space, so that's good. Okay, so how do you end up manipulating this? Okay, lots of different ways. Let me just, I guess, play around with the mix. Okay, that's right. So that's exactly what we're doing. So question from Ida, can we mask it? Yes, that's exactly what the mix does. It allows us to mask it. So you add the mask on the mix parameter. So just to show you, I'll click on that and I'll just look for something. Let's say I'll use this checkerboard pattern. Okay. So basically the mask is the checkerboard pattern, meaning the checkerboard has black and white elements there. Notice what happens if I use it as a checkerboard pattern, right? Notice what happens there. Okay. Now disregard that because so it's not clear, but if you look closer, disregard this one. Basically, if you have something that's transmissive, it's also going to let light pass through. That's why you're getting the pattern as shadows there in the back. But anyway, if I just look at it here, and then maybe zoom in to that area, or dolly in, then hopefully that becomes clearer in terms of what's happening. So see guys, notice some areas are made of glass and some areas are made of wood. Okay? And again, it's using that checkerboard pattern, right? So the checkerboard pattern controls that. So how can you adjust it? You can, I guess, modify the checkerboard itself. So I think you can assign, you can repeat, or you can modify the checkerboard as well, meaning I can rotate the frame. So see, notice that I'm rotating the checkerboard pattern. Yeah, maybe I think I need to update if I'm planning to. So I need to update if I'm planning to modify the UVs for that. So see, anyway, you can see the difference, right? It's using the checkerboard to create that difference. Now, if I didn't use a checkerboard, that might create an even subtler effect. Okay, so what I'll do, everyone, is I'm going to select the doll. Okay, and then what I'll do is maybe look for, or the material itself, sorry. And then what I'll do is I'm going to assign a different texture to the mix. And you can do this by right-clicking on that mix, break connection. So that means I can assign a different texture. Plug that in, look for the texture. So let's say you can assign a file texture if you want, but for me, I'm just thinking a texture, let's say a cellular noise one. Now see this, it doesn't know what you're trying to connect. What I'm thinking is I just really need to connect one of these colors, R, G, and B, because that's black and white anyway. Maybe this one, I'll connect that to mix 2. Okay? And let's see if that actually helps. Okay? So what I'm thinking is let's just render this one out. Update current scene. And let's see if we can just manipulate the noise itself. Okay, so for the noisy, it's actually giving you something. Maybe I'll just increase the scale, maybe 10, 10, and 10. So you can see the noise there. And then maybe I'll play around with, maybe the noise itself isn't that good. Let's just update this one. So I think maybe perhaps the noise is the issue. Let me just break that connection. And then just let's use a totally different one. The Arnold noises are a bit tricky because they're not really RGB noises. Let's just see. Maybe I'll just use this one. Again, similar stuff, guys. See, connect one of the color and maybe plug that into the mix. And let's see if we can just render that one out. There you go. So 20, 20, and 20. So see, now you have a better looking combination. Certain parts of it are made of glass, so maybe this part. And notice that some parts of it is also made of wood. But again, you just need to play around with some of the settings there. So maybe it's 5, 5, and 5. Okay, so see guys, notice now you have something slightly different. Again, you can play around with noise or you can play around with some of the other textures there, but the idea behind this is you can combine multiple textures or multiple materials together to create a layered effect. Okay, so notice now that I do have something like that here. Again, I'm using two weird ones, which is wood and, wood and glass, which makes it a bit weird. But yes, now you can have that. So I think that's it. Okay, again, I can play around with this a bit more. But again, the idea behind it is you now have enough to start adding materials and manipulating textures in your scene. So just checking if this is clear for everyone in terms of what you're able to do with materials and textures. So we talked about layering it, but we also talked about how you can just use a material and then just adjust the placement of that texture using by manipulating the UVs. Okay, so final check if that's clear. Ida, Danny, Ajungian, and Samuel makes sense. With that said, let's just have a look at what I expect you guys to do for the last challenge of this assessment. So we won't have a challenge next week. Maybe you just end up sharing your stuff, but it's no big deal. But what I'll do is, see, for this one, I just want you to share 2 or 3 images of your shaded scene, rendered, right, in different angles. And that's it. Okay, I'll just put that in Teams. And I'll plug that in. So I'll just start a post. Again, for you guys, make sure to share your work and engage in the challenge. So you can already start working your assessment, right? So week 3 challenge. Okay. And then I'll just plug that at RTA. Sorry, that's at LLD. And that's 927. And then there you go. Okay. And post. Okay, that's it. So I think we're good. Any questions, feel free to stay online. If not, look forward to seeing what you guys create. As I mentioned, for some of you who haven't done the challenge yet, you can still do it. But that means also that you need to start also including things like shading and textures. Okay, so I think that's it, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording. And then I'll see you guys next week. Okay, we'll talk about how you actually render this one out.